Hey guys, autograph seekers, girls, anybody else that's interested in learning to fly, learning about flying. I'm going to take advantage of this bad day today that really can't do much and show you just a brief idea of the things you're looking for in an inspection when you're looking in the engine compartment. Most people get really confused looking into the engine compartment and they're not sure what to look for. They're not mechanically inclined and they say, I wouldn't know what to find or I wouldn't know what to look for. I don't know if something's broken or not. So we're going to kind of talk about briefly what you're going to be looking for and the thought process behind that. So I'm Joe Stanley from pilot flight training courses at Lake in the Hills Airport, and I'll try to give you little tips every now and then about different things uh, as we go on. Today I'm going to talk about some things to look at in the engine compartment when you're doing your pre-flight inspection. A lot of people have no idea what they're looking for. They say they're not mechanical. They really don't know what they're looking for or how to tell if something's broken or not. So I know it kind of looks like a mess in there, but there's just a few simple concepts you have to understand, and it's not too difficult to spot if something's wrong if you're just looking closely. The first thing we want to be aware of is leaks, oil, things like that. So you know the engine's right here, and this is where most of the oil's lubricating through that area. So it's either going to be around the cylinders here, you're going to check for oil, or it's going to be leaking down at the bottom somewhere if there was oil leaking down at the bottom. So you would look very carefully at things like that. Along the side of the engine, anywhere you can see oil would be leaking, that's where you would kind of look for oil. You also want to look for connections and bolts. Anything that's connected should be securely connected. All the bolts should be connected. There shouldn't be any leaks around the cylinders in there. In here, you want to look for cracks and leaks in here too. Also, what I'm talking about is not just cracks in cylinders, but cracks in wires, things like that. So you have your spark plug wires, they go into the cylinder down here. If there was a crack, you would probably notice it between these slats here. So when you're looking at your cylinders, look closely at where the spark plugs connect, where they go in. Make sure there's no cracks. Make sure the wires that are attached to the spark plug are good. They're not fraying. No wires are showing from there. So that's what you're looking at on the cylinders. Underneath the cylinders at the bottom, you have your exhaust, and you want to check the bolts and the connections around there. You also want to check the condition of the exhaust to make sure there's no cracks in it and everything's connected securely there. You also have primer lines that go into the cylinder, so carefully inspect those for leaks, spark plugs, wires, everything around that area. When you're looking inside the engine compartment, anytime you see hoses, look at these hoses for holes or cracks, and also make sure they're connected securely on the ends. You don't want any kind of cracks because you can get carbon monoxide in the airplane. So make sure they're securely attached. And on the muffler over here, if you could see cracks, anything like that, you're going to check the tubing going into the muffler right here and check carefully around that area. The air filter box is right here. The hose comes in from the front right there, goes into the box, and then it goes into a tube, and that goes right into the carburetor right in here, in this area down here in this box. So this box is where that tube goes into, and that carburetor is right above there on the bottom of the engine. This is a Piper Warrior. So I'm looking for leaks or anything out of the carburetor, anything dripping from the carburetor. I'm looking for the connections, and anything that's attached, you want to make sure it's attached securely. Some of the connections for steering, things like that, there's a big cluster of wires and cables and everything here. So just look the best you can at some of the connections on here, and the springs, make sure they're attached properly. Anything you could see that's got an attachment on it or a bolt. Check carefully around this thing for cracks too, because those things can crack over time, and that could cause issues with your nose wheel if it did crack, steering, things like that. You have your wires. Every wire that you have in here, you're just checking to make sure there's no burns and they're connected properly. If there's a connection on it, like this white one right here, you want to make sure it's connected securely. There's no burned wires, anything like that. So that's kind of what you're checking for on the connections going in. Definitely check the oil when you check it. You have numbers on the oil. I don't know if we're going to be able to see numbers from here. There's some numbers there, but you can't see it. But you want to check the quantity of the oil to make sure you have the proper amount, and don't over tighten the stick when you, or the dipstick when you tighten it. The wires going into your magnetos here, you want to look at carefully. These are the magnetos. This is one magneto on this side. There's one on the other side too, in case you're curious about that. And also the mounts where the motor connects. These big tubing framework down here. This is all connected to your motor and holding it onto the airplane. So those are the kind of things you're checking for. Anything that's attached, make sure it's securely attached. You don't want any leaks on the airplane and the bottom, anything like that. There might be a couple drips if you have a real old plane that drips a little oil every now and then, but you shouldn't have large pools of any kind of liquid or anything, so check that carefully. When you do check the propeller, you're checking along the leading edge and the trailing edge for cracks and nicks along the propeller on both sides. You're also checking inside here at the alternator belt. I don't know if you can see it or not, probably not very well, but that's what's going to provide the electricity for your items in the airplane. So you want to make sure that's tight and it's working properly. And the openings also you're checking. The openings going into the air filter and into down here in the engine, and the openings looking into where the engine airflow goes while you're flying. You want to make sure there's no bird nests and things in there. On this side of the engine, you're kind of reviewing the same kind of thing, looking at the cylinders, the wires, everything. Make sure everything's attached properly. The exhaust down here, the hoses that come in. Here's the one hose that goes in and goes to the carburetor at the bottom for your carburetor heat. You can see that right there. That goes into the bottom of the carburetor, and it comes off the muffler shroud right here. So there's a muffler where the hose goes into a little shroud and goes around it. That's where your heat comes from, for your carburetor heat, your engine heat, or your cabin heat, things like that. You also have a electric fuel pump, or an engine driven fuel pump, I'm sorry, right here you're checking, and the magneto on this side also. And that white thing behind there, that's where the oil filter is. You want to make sure there's no oil leaking around there. All the hoses going into the back of the engine are attached. The electrical wires going into the back of the magnetos are attached. And also we have an electric fuel pump here, so you want to make sure there's no fuel leaking there. And this is a Piper Warrior. Most airplanes are similar, but you don't have as much access to the engine compartment as you do in a Warrior. Down here is a fuel strainer. If there's fuel leaking here, you'd see it, or you might see blue staining down there if there was a lot of leaking going on. But this is a very clean airplane. This engine's got almost 2,000 hours on it right now. I have a new one on order, and it's still running great, still not leaking, and it looks good. So that's kind of a brief description of what you're looking for. Anything, hoses, cracks, wires burned, leaks, connections that are all disconnected, or something, a wire's hanging loose or something like that. Those are the kind of things you're looking for when you're looking in the engine compartment. And I'll provide other tips now and then too, but I just wanted to go over this because most people get confused in this area.